Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Again, welcome to the ACIL EMC Webinar Series. This is the first one for 2016. It's February of 2016. And what I'm showing on the screen is the announcement for all of the workshops that will be done throughout the year. So as I scroll down, you'll see that I've updated to one more than we did last year. Now it'll be 6. And the dates are shown, and again, Bob can give you information on the URL for those respective dates once well, actually it's done automatically when you register. So we will have in March, I'm going to review the Smart Grid Electromagnetic Interoperability Working Group activity, because by that time we would have several documents that are in play. And then in June, I will do something on the ANSI Accredited Standards Committee C63 on EMC. They would have met 3 weeks earlier. And that's usually what I do. Within 3 weeks to 6 weeks of a major EMC meeting, I want to give a 1-hour update. Then later in June, there is a IEC, International Electric Technical Commission Advisory Committee on EMC, which I chair, and that's going to be held in China, and it gets over with in the end of the 3rd week of May, so I'll talk about that in June. Then there's the usual summer solstice of meetings not being held, and so we'll pick back up again in November. The reason I wait till November because the biggest one is the IEC CISPR meeting, International Special Committee on Radio Perturbations or Radio Interference, and we are planning to meet it doesn't mean it's where we meet, but this is Germany. There is some sense that has been moved to China. Then at the end of the year, the last meeting of ASEC is being held, I guess 3 weeks earlier, and that will then wrap up the major EMC activity, both nationally and internationally, for the commercial side of the house. I do not go into Mill Standard 461G, which has been published in the last 2 or 3 weeks. We just don't have the time to do everyone's favorite standard. So I welcome you all to the series, and hopefully you'll take down the dates. And I think we will then start. Let me close this. And before we get into, let me just see what I want to bring up here. There's a lot of things that are happening, but let me bring up the announcement one more time. Well, I had it here before. Let me just see if I can find it again. Well, it's just easier to go into the Internet Explorer. I wanted to bring you up onto the IEC website, excuse me, the ANSI website, which is simply, this is what I suggest you might do from time to time. So it's www.ansi.org, and up comes the ANSI website. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that we're going to be talking about the technical committee activity of the IEC, and that is, the Secretariat is the American National Standards Institute, and you can see they have a scroll creep from left to right, and one of them talks about it. But to find it, first of all, you go over to the left column under Standards Activity, and you scroll down here to USNC, and this is, in fact, the homepage of the U.S. National Committee of the IEC. And what I'd just like to, again, scroll a little bit here is there is an overview statement, which is obvious, and there's a brief history of the organization. And when you get down to the officers, I mean, that's okay. And right now, by the way, Charlie Zeggers, who has been the General Secretary of the USNC, has retired at the end of 2015, and his assistant, Tony Zertucci, has taken over, and you can see his email address there. Let me bring up the organizational chart. I thought that'd be useful as a lead into our talk today. You can see the USNC has a couple of places on this chart. Of course, the board, the USNC membership reports and has guidance from the board of directors of ANSI. And if you look at the USNC Council, they are the policy setting people in what the U.S. views in how they operate. And you can see off to the right here the Secretariat, and that's Tony Zertucci, I just mentioned. And they do have several standing committees, obviously, on finance and continuing education and so forth. But if you go down to just below the council is the U.S. Technical Management Committee. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, and you can see then how it fits into the structure. And there are various technical advisory groups for those technical committees of the IEC, which the U.S. National Committee has a technical advisory group for. So they don't have it for all. And on the right there, you can see there's coordinating committee. CC stands for coordinating committee. And one of them, for example, is the coordinating committee on EMC, which I also chair. And I'll talk about that later in the presentation. So again, the whole purpose here is to get you how you might get on to find things out about the U.S. National Committee and the membership and the council. And again, I'm just scrolling fairly fast through here because there's a lot of things you would maybe want to read at your leisure. There's the responsibility of the Technical Management Committee. Develop U.S. positions in preparation for the Standardization Management Board meeting, which is, by the way, on the 23rd of February, of which I'm giving a presentation on one of the advisory committee activity that I chair. Then appoint and oversee these technical advisors for the technical advisory groups for, again, those TCs which the USNC has a participating level of activity. Approve any secretariats to the IEC. We have several secretariats that the best part of it is the secretariat names the committee chair, and therefore they are sought after. The secretariats are sought after. And then, of course, they can host subcommittee meetings in the U.S. And there are relationships with North America, Canada, and Mexico in particular. And then the advisory committees, I've already mentioned them, and you can see it in front of you. ACOS is on safety, essentially electrical shock. There's one on environmental aspects, so-called green activity. I already mentioned the one on electromagnetic compatibility that I chair. There's one on energy efficiency, and then there's one on security. And there are others, and I'll try to point them out as we go through the rest of the presentation. So I think with that, it's all I wanted to present on ANSI itself and how the USNC fits. By the way, the USNC, with their due structure, pays for the use of the employment of Tony Zertucci, and he has an assistant, Kevin Sullivan and Mary Johnson, and so forth. So there's about 5 or 6 people at ANSI headquarters on 43rd Street in downtown Manhattan, and those have to be paid. In addition to the dues the USNC pays to the IEC to be a member, and that's something in the order of $1 million a year, by the way. So the dues are not just to keep people in good food, it's to actually stay in the system and to be able to, because of that due structure in the IEC, we being the United States, automatically gets a seat on the Standardization Management Board, which is the technical board that manages all of the technical committees in the IEC, in addition to what we would be interested in, which is the EMC committees, which is CISPR and TC77. So with that, I think I'm going to close this part of the internet, and with that background, get into, close this too. And get into the actual gist of our webinar. This is the meeting that was held a little less than a month ago, and the meetings are held just before the Standardization Management Board meetings of the IEC, because a lot of what we do at these meetings, which are several days, by the way, prepare for what the U.S. might comment on, either through electronic means, or since we have a member of the Standardization Management Board, we would do it in real time at the meeting in Geneva. So I thought it'd be very useful, and that's why I picked this particular topic that we haven't talked before in any of my previous recorded webinars, because it is important to kind of look outside of the U.S. and what happens beyond that, and how we prepare to be part of that international EMC standardization activity. So it was held, and the draft agenda, actually it became the final agenda. And I'm going to sort of go through slowly and open up some of the attachments, and we'll get a chance, I'll get a chance to tell you, what was said, or at least show what was presented. So the agenda is pretty typical. We approve the agenda. You can see 1.2.1 are the minutes of the last meeting. If I bring any of these up, you'll get the minutes of the last meeting. I don't propose to do that because I want to stay current. Then we have the USNC Technical Management Committee reviews the appointments and reappointments. And if I bring up this document here, let me make it bigger. We have responsibility for approving the appointment of the technical advisors, which is the lead of the technical advisory groups. And you can see on the first line there, I am the group manager, and I'll talk a little bit more about all the committees I manage. And there was a stepping down of the chair of CISPR D, which is automotive, EMC, and Craig Fanning from Elite Engineering took that over, and that was then reported and approved in sort of a consent agenda basis. And I'm not going to go through the rest of the list, but you can see on the right there are members of the USNC Technical Management Committee are given technical advisory groups to watch over, more or less. And you can see that, for instance, Cho does work on 32C. And again, it's not important to go into all the 65A, for example, is industrial control. But it has to be officially approved, and at the meeting, all of these 7 or 8 were approved, and we go on. There are meetings that, if there is a meeting of a technical committee in the United States, it has to be approved by the Technical Management Committee. And you can see for this coming year, or this year, excuse me, that we have 3 technical committees that are meeting. One is on, as you can see, their insulating coordination for low voltage equipment. It's being held at NEMA at their headquarters in Roslyn, Arlington, and TC2 and rotating, etc. So if there was a technical advisory group member in the vicinity or could travel to the meeting, at least it stays within the bounds of the United States. And then if there's anyone that said, well, we're planning something in the future, In this case, you can see that TC10, fluids for electrotechnical applications, they are thinking about making an invitation for 2017. And what will happen is they will come back at a subsequent meeting in this year and say yes or no, we're going to do it, and ask for the TMC approval. Okay, and a nice thing about also a nice twist is that when someone is stepping down, retired, or has done a very good job, we do give certificates of appreciation, and you can see the people on the left there, and on the center is for the work they did on respective subcommittees and technical committees. In some years, because of the term limitations now that are in place, especially for TC chairs, there would be more on this list because people will go past their term limits, and the term limits generally tend to be 3 years with the ability to extend for 2 more 3-year terms, but in no case to extend beyond 9 years. And just to give you a little flavor, this is the end of my 9-year term as CISPR chairman. I stepped down end of the plenary in November in China. There will be a replacement, and since the Secretariat is the United Kingdom, they have the right to name a replacement, and they have named a replacement, or at least will. I will just make a statement because the actual document has not been circulated naming the person, but it's someone from the Swedish telecom area. So let me close this. Then we go into balance of the agenda, and at this particular one there was no additional additions. Alec McMillan is the Vice President of the USNC, and he's, by that office, he is therefore the Chairman of the Technical Management Committee. And there was an interesting discussion. We have conformity assessment, we have the Technical Management Committee, we have the Council. The Council is similar to the standardization, to the Council that they have in the IEC, and the TMC is equivalent in the US to the Standardization Management Board, and the conformity assessment has their own activity in the IEC. And the question was raised, well, can a member of the USNC name a person that can be on all 3 of these committees? And I'm not going to go into the details, but there's pluses and minuses. The obvious one, there's one person can attend all 3 because it's held in sequence at the same location within the same time frame. The other one is, well, how can you be, the opposite view is, how can you be proficient or be informed sufficiently to work in all 3 areas? Can they do things differently and have different scopes? Again, the TMC does the technical management, the Council does the policy part, and the conformity assessment obviously works on the conformity assessment aspects. So the bottom line is they decided to keep the ability, if someone wants to join more than one, they're welcome, but not to do any restrictions. And that may be revisited at the next meeting. And again, 3.2 was brought up by TC78, but again, it was a problem with trying to cover too many technologies by one person, and because that one person that might be named is not knowledgeable in the other aspects of even the same TC, how do you keep their interest and bother to even show up at meetings? So the reason why I even talk about this is that it's not straightforward that you name a person from your organization of a paid member of the United States National Committee, and that it's downhill from there. Everything's in place, because again, it depends on the position credentials of the person that wants to be on one aspect of the TC but not the other. So how does the member organization determine who should cover the other, or simply force one person to do more? And again, that gets into what the companies want to do. USNC is very open to a good decision and not force their will on anybody. The next, we get into Clause 5 here, and I'm going to spend a little time on this. The whole purpose of the TMC meeting is to prepare the U.S. National Committee representative on the Standardization Management Board for how to respond to actions that will be brought up in the agenda, which is in 23rd of February. What I have here is this 901 document, which I'm going to bring up, is several things that will be on the agenda. And so we asked the U.S. representative to speak to it, and Bob Franks is speaking on this smart energy, which is a system committee. SYC is system committee. And when I bring up his report, this is the template that we all use for our reports. And again, I'm just going to try to highlight a few things. There are several working groups in this system group in 6, and you can see the names of them. Smart Energy Development Plan, a roadmap of how the standards fit in, and so forth. And they have a Chairman's Advisory Group. So if you look at just the scopes of those working groups, it's quite extensive. And they have advisory groups. I mean, look at that list. So the system committee that we're talking about here has a lot of work to do. And of course, one of the things that we always ask for is there any issues or recommendations of the Technical Management Committee? And the reason why it says or council up there, because this form is used for council issues as well, for council members. So USTAG has expanded to 17 members, as it shows here, to individuals inside and outside of NEMA. And Zertucci has a call for participation on the monthly standards action that ANSI puts out, which is where the PIN statements are and activity of all the standards. So the good news here is you can say that getting 17 members was, they consider very successful. And most of the work, as you see, was in working groups and advisory groups. And we're trying to get at least a representation in all of them. And right now we have 2 of them covered. So we're working on more, and the recommendation is very simple. Maintain a focus, because there will be things coming out of this group that may apply in more, because when you talk about smart energy, you're talking about smart grid, you're talking about renewables, it's a very broad, including smart city, by the way, where you might have Wi-Fi access throughout the city without having to go to a hotspot. So let me close that down. And again, my purpose here is to, if there's something that was reported, I'll bring it up. See, 5.3 is smart cities, which is part also of that system activity we just saw up there in smart energy. So they have to talk to each other. There's a DC issue with high and low voltage. In this particular case, there is a low voltage activity, and low voltage tends to be under 1,000 volts AC. We have, when we get to the high voltage, we're talking about 500 kilovolts and above. And yes, there are systems of a megavolt. Whoop, why is it going so fast? Non-traditional distribution networks and microgrids, well, I think that speaks for itself, but let's just see what he spoke of there. Let me bring up that one. non-conventional distribution. And you can see there's work teams here. So when someone says, is there a working group? Well, some of them call them working groups, some of them call them task groups, some of them call them advisory groups, and so forth. And you really got to go into the scopes of these committees to determine even the right nomenclature to use. The thing, I mean, this particular one, they've had a meeting, and they indicated here that there's no issues that they're going to bring up to the USNC TMC to review. And then the recommendation is to continue to support and contribute actively. And the next meeting is in March of this year in Egypt. And these meetings do go around the world, but generally the requirement is that obviously there's an invitation from a country, and usually it's there is a person on the technical committee or the system committee that resides in the place where that meeting where the meeting invitation came from. Okay, so I'm going to close this guy. And then we have our favorite topic on EMC. And there are two committees. I think I showed you already. There's one on the advisory committee itself, and then there's that coordinating committee on EMC, which I chair both. So let me just bring up what I said in my report. We met in November in Boston. In fact, we met at Logan Airport. People could walk from the airplane right to the hotel without having even to take a shuttle. And I'm just going to tick through some of the topics here. The elephant in the room presently is compatibility levels with the needs for power meters to operate correctly, and read that to mean smart grid with using information on the line to control it. Usually it's TLC or public law, excuse me, PLT, frequencies below 150 kilohertz. So power line communications is the way in which most of the smart grids are operating under. And because of that, they are very concerned of what the power supplies are putting in on the actual line itself, because obviously every piece of electronics has an AC-DC converter. Well, that AC-DC converter has, shall we say, noise coming out of it that is still below 150 kilohertz. In fact, some of these terrible ones have conducted emissions well over 30 megahertz. And the question is there a level which that could be controlled? Because there are no limits below 150 kilohertz for conducted emissions and also for immunity of the meter. And that is a very hot topic. One thing is you don't want to have the need to put a filter on every piece of electronics that's out in the consumer world, because you're talking about billions with a B and probably T with trillions of products, and you can imagine the cost of that. And by the way, during the meeting, it was very interesting that they said even if you put this filter on, the life expectancy of a filter is 15 years. So if you spend all that money to do that, which is not going to happen, then 15 years later you got to spend it again. Well, you can see the reception to that was, well, I'd say, was fairly cold. And then the question is, well, can the PLT work in a noisier environment and still retain the communication channel on the smart meter, for example? And there's a lot of work going on in SC77A, and they have come up with a compatibility level for those two devices up to 30 kilohertz, from 2 kilohertz up to 30, but the real bone of contention is between 30 and 150. And there they went out to the national committees asking, should we have multiple compatibility levels depending where you are on the utility system, whether you're near the customer or in the power substation or en route. And that has a, you can see the document for comment there. That is ending, it has ended, and I'm looking for the compilation of comments to see how that might go. Then the advisory committee, and I tell the TMC that we have several committees that give reports, and there's the list, and you can see it's very inclusive, and all these technical committees have EMC aspects, and that's why as an advisory committee to the SMB we have to be a sort of a place to air any issues that might come up amongst, as I just mentioned, TC22 and TC13. So cables and connectors, usually people don't think of a cable as an EMC device. Well, it's very important when you connect two boxes, and do you shielded or unshielded or screened or unscreened. And so they think of themselves as EMC oriented. The one that may not pop up is in your review of EMC is human exposure, TC106. And the reason why we're involved with TC106, well, I'll talk about in a moment, is that, you know, they measure electric field strength as we do in EMC, but then they convert that into how it penetrates the, in the case of a device next to the human ear, how it penetrates into the brain, and therefore is an exposure that is not wanted. And so they go another step, and they call that specific absorption rate. But the bottom line is there is a kindred relationship, because we both measure at the start electrical fields, both in a near field, far field, and so forth. TC120 on storage systems is becoming very popular. When they started at TC120, they had all sorts of people wanting to join that. In fact, I have just sent off an email to the chair of TC120 inviting that person to attend the next ASEC meeting, which is in May of this year. Then we get reports from outside, and you can see one of them is IEEE, and in fact I give that report because the IEC and the IEEE have a dual logo agreement, and there's already 50-some IEEE standards that have also been published as IEC standards under a contract or an agreement that dates back over 10 years. Then I'm just going to go a little fast. We give workshops, and this one will be given as shown in item 4 here in China and at the Asian Pacific EMC Symposium. I will be there with the past ASIC chairman, Dr. Radasky, and we're going to give talks on all those subjects in the tutorial. And the TMC, I tell that for the TMC so they know that we're into the education business, because the TMC is into education aspects. We have a lot of work going on to enlist young professionals. And someone said, what is young professional? The recent definition I heard, which is not written down, I don't think, but maybe it is less than 35 years old. I can't remember 35. I can't even remember 60, but don't tell anybody. Then we coordinate with the ITU telecommunication, International Telecommunication Engineering and Telecom sector. And interesting, they do work in various K documents that parallel a lot of the activity of the CISPR documents. So that's why CISPR has 4 members of ASEC, and TC77 has 4 members. And so we also see what's happening in study group 5 of the ITUT that mainly work with 77 subcommittees. At least they pass information back and forth. Already talked about that. We're updating our EMC technology sector on the IEC homepage. If you go to the IEC homepage and down to the left under technology sectors, you'll see electromagnetic compatibility. You click on that, and all the information on on EMC that is publicly available shows, and the ASEC is responsible for that entire website. So I've made a choice to update it because it hadn't been updated for 15 years or so. Next meeting is in London in May and so forth. Then I make a very short report on the coordinating committee because, again, it's depends on topics that cut across the various technical advisory groups that have EMC, and that means if I go back to this list up here, we have on the U.S. EMC Coordinating Committee representatives from those technical committees, because again, if we have to come up with a U.S. position that we would present to the Technical Management Committee, and that affects all those committees, obviously we want to make sure they agree with it before we even present that. So I think with that, I had a couple of recommendations. You know, as usual, continue to monitor. I identified that we're working on the young professionals activity, and the fourth one there is the USNC Technical Management Committee has educational offerings, and when we get the website updated from the IEC, I'm going to recommend that we give a half-a-day minimum tutorial on EMC and the IEC. And by the way, I put those all in PowerPoint slides already, about 60 slides, which will make a good half-day discussion. But we're working on updating all those slides right now. So with that, there's no other recommendation. And I didn't get any questions on the report other than discussion on the coordinating committee and how should there be a technical advisory group for the coordinating committee. And we ended up with use of a new term called virtual VTAGs. And that means that, first of all, it's all done electronically, no meetings involved. And secondly, the virtuality is dependent on the interest of the TCs, not having to have a technical advisory group per se. Okay, we had a call-in report on the advisory committee on environment. I only want to show for our meeting here those things that were actually provided. ACOS, the Advisory Committee on Safety, this is electrical safety, and their coordinating committee, they always give a nice report, and in fact it's quite long. We don't have time to go through it all. And of course they start off when they met last. And they do come up with you know, things like certain committees are not responding to them, and you know, they keep after it. This one on the technical specification 61000-1-2, which is you all probably are familiar with medical safety, the 60601 activity. There is a methodology for achieving functional safety. I only mention this not in passing. Functional safety is different than EMC, although some of the EMC testing could be applied to see if the equipment works as specified over its lifetime. So a functional safety test would not just comprise of one, let's say a test for immunity at the time it's manufactured, but it would have to have accelerated life cycle, you know, heating up the components to replicate what would be the aging, let's say 10 years hence, and then make a judgment: does it remain safe if it's exposed, let's say, to the RF environment? So functional safety is a different view. It's more or less a risk of it's not performing, which again is to determine that. I've already mentioned, you know, accelerated life testing and so forth. Even though the standard EMC tests that we would normally do on conductor, radiated, DSD, burst, transient, etc., might be used as a starting point, and along the way, as the product is replicating an aging effect in the laboratory. So again, functional safety, when you hear that in EMC, they are related, but they're not the same. Because people say, well, if the product doesn't work properly, let's say if it's a crane with microprocessor control and an FM signal causes that control to go haywire and the crane swings and bangs into a building and hurts or kills, that's a safety aspect, but that's not what we're talking about in functional safety. We're talking about how that would happen if it passed the test to start with, but then that crane's used for 20 years, and what happens in 20 years? And that's the functional safety part. So it's a more or less a complex subject, but I thought at least I'd introduce it to you because it's considered by ACOS. I don't propose to go through anything that stands out, to discuss that stands out, but they are into risk analysis. And as you can see, the Japanese want that to be taken into account for safety purposes. And I'm just sort of scanning quickly here to see if there's anything here. There are, they do publish guides. Only the advisory committees in the IEC can publish guides. And so a technical committee cannot. And you can see they have one on home control systems, on safety aspects. They have one on risk assessment and on for low voltage equipment, which is essentially what's in the house, and they're responsible for it. Their main product is Guide 104, and therefore that has to be under revision, review, and you can see there's some topics they've shown here, which frankly I don't know all the acronyms myself, so I'm about to state them. There's a guide on safety of multimedia, and the list goes on. They have a very large committee, and they have a newsletter they publish, so I'm thinking about along those lines as well, that to get the message out for ASEC, you might want to look into a newsletter. But we're a small group. We only have about 20 members, where ACOS probably has close to 100. Not all directly on the committee, but access to that number of people. Okay, so we have essentially gone through what the TMC will be, what the SMB will be discussing, at its meeting in February, at the end of this month, 23rd of February. There's an advisory committee on security. Smart manufacturing is a fairly new one. Wearable smart devices, that's also a new one. What is this? What should be considered with wearable smart devices? And think about what are wearable. Well, hearing the watch that takes your heart rate and so forth is wearable. Should there be any strategy on how those are handled in the IEC from any aspect, from medical, from environmental, from EMC, etc. They're just starting their scope, and my guess is that this will be very interesting, and the U.S. will probably take part of it, and maybe those that are watching the recording of this webinar would be interested. So we did schedule lunch. That's good, huh? Then there's other things that are generally discussed. There is a directives maintenance team, and the directive ISO IEC directives are on the IEC and ISO websites, and they are the rules we follow. It turns out in the supplement to the IEC ISO directives and Annex SM, Sierra, Mike, is the rules that the CISPR follows. And the reason I even mention that is because we're a special committee, we have to put it in the directives itself, how we what we can and cannot do, whereas the other TCs follow the generalities are in other areas of their work. So Tony Zertuzzi is the U.S. representative on the director's maintenance team. And what they do is people send them information, send them requests for changes in the directives, make it more efficient. Some of the wording, it doesn't make sense now because it was put in there 15 years ago and things have changed. And this committee then deliberates, you can see the next meeting is in South Africa, and it makes recommendation to the SMB for changes, and in some cases for no changes. There are other groups here. This is a 516, it's just information. Newly created Standardization Management Board groups. You see there's one on communication technology. The second bullet item is there's the one on application of robotic technology. There is a new interest area of robotics. And to me, that, from an EMC perspective, that is an opening for us to kind of get in there in the front end because, as you well know, robotics and robotic manufacturing is virtually all that happens. People interaction is going to be very little, and you go down to making silicon chips, and that's all done robotically. So the question is, what should be looked at? Safety aspects should be looked at, the environmental aspects, etc. So I'll be interested to see how that works out. And frankly, I think I will request the U.S. National Committee to make sure we have a member of that group. The next one, 515, we're getting kind of close to what I wanted to cover. There is a list of actions from the last meeting. Well, for every Standardization Management Board meeting, there's a list of decisions made. And I'm just going to point out 3 or 4. There's like 33 decisions at the last meeting in November. And 154 is meeting number 154, and the 4th decision is on disruptive technologies. How would you like to be on a disruptive technology? If you look down to note, here's the definitions, however. A disruptive technology is the innovation that helps create a new market and value network and eventually disrupts an existing market and value network, displacing an earlier technology. So that's what that's all about, and so they're looking for the future and not putting whole technology out of business, or if they are, to give them heads up that this is the way things are heading. I would have selected a different word than disruptive, but there it is. Let's move on to decision 9. I read this ahead, and I just want to pick out a couple that caught my eye for this webinar. This just to give the technical committees a update of what's available at the IEC central office. There's anything from a help desk to a guide on writing the standards, the templates, checklists, etc. And so this is, I just want to show you that the SMB is looking out for the standards developers as well and trying to get some help where they need it. I'm going to go down to 26. And there's 19. 23, 24, 25, 26. Smart Grid User Interface. This is a project committee, not a standards committee, PC, that just was established 118, and it's a temporary one, but it was to look at a work plan on how they will handle user interface and the standardization that might apply from the IEC list of standards. I'm also interested in seeing how that goes, because that has direct implication on the ACIL Smart Grid interaction with the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel. And let me go down to, I think, the last one, 33. I just want to just point out that the IEEE is always invited to give a presentation to the SMB because of this dual logo agreement. And I think that's all I want to say about that. So Sam Siaka is a friend of mine, and he gives his report almost every SMB meeting. All right, back to the agenda. There's reports by the secretaries of the TC members that are involved. The group manager assignments, these are the one of us that have to keep track of what's going on. And here's the list as of January. And you can see all of the tags or that are there. For example, Alec McMillan has responsibility for being the advisor to all of these committees. He's got 7 of them. Sonia Bird from UL has a bunch. The 45 is connectors, by the way, and cables. No, I'm sorry. 45 is nuclear instrumentation. 46 is cables. And you go down the list, and Ken Gutman is the winner. This is mainly power supply related in 23, and he's got 15 that he's responsible for. And I am the new winner. I have 16 subcommittees that I'm responsible for in technical committees. I'm trying to get that list down because you can see all the other members of the TMC which have to have responsibilities. I want to move them around. For example, TC1 is definitions, TC3 is symbols. It seems to me I could find some others to take over those and relieve me a little bit of all the work I have to do. Okay, so there's 165 committees, by the way. So it's a lot that USNC is involved with. All right, let's move on. So we came into a close. Then there's also secretaries. We all go through that. Here, this list of technical advisors that are needed for these particular TCs. And you can see I won the lottery here. I'm trying to get replacements for most of those. And not being too successful, by the way. I keep trying, though. And so forth. I don't want to go through the list. There's appointments. And we're always happy when the TA says I will accept the reappointment to be the technical advisor of a technical advisory group. And let's see what else I want to bring up here. I'm not going to bring up the adoptions, just a short statement. The IEC always is asked the question of the national committees of all the countries that are members, are you adopting the IEC published version of the standard, that might apply to your country, in your country? And adoption is doing it entirely. Adaption, with an A, is you using it as a base but have some changes. And that's what the European Union does, for example. When you get an IEC standard, they have what's called a common modification. That's the adaptation of a IEC standard in the case of CISPR or TC77 standards, for example. So we're trying to get that to be a more open process and actually to find out, in fact, in the U.S., what is the status of total acceptance or not. There is a workshop that I'm just kind of going through what's left on the agenda here. This is a lot of administrative work. There will be a workshop on innovation in the next general meeting in Frankfurt, Germany. And I think this is the announcement. Yeah. An open platform, you can read it as well as I can. And obviously they want people to come along. And all these education activities, if they try out, this is a trial case, and depending on the success of it, it might be more ingrained. But if you look at the announcement, it's pretty, well, I'll say it's kind of a marketing commercial, if you will. But there's some interesting topics if you look at the bold print. how, they're worried about future technologies, how you work together, interdisciplinary, what is the complexity of a connected world, the smart city aspect, and so forth. So those things are announced at the TMC meeting. And let's see what else we have here. We do work in the Americas, and I won't, we have actually meetings even in South America and in Central America, as well as Canada. So we look at from a North America, South America aspect, and they have initiatives going on, in particular Argentina, and we try to share information and be there to help where we can. So there's usually a delegation from the TMC that goes down and participates. Usually the General Secretariat is one of the delegates. In this case, it's Tony Zartucci. Then the last one is just the meeting schedule. And I think it's just kind of fun to look at what we're talking about here. I already mentioned the Standardization Management Board meeting in Geneva, which I'll be giving the report on the Advisory Committee on EMC in a couple of weeks. Then they try to point out other things that are going on. You can see there's a Science and Engineering Festival in April in DC. The standards work in South America. There's a meeting in Ecuador. The stuff from the Pacific, the PASC, this time is going to be held in Indonesia. And again, the TMC members the TMC has a delegation as well as the Council of the USNC that goes to these meetings, or at least has someone there that can report back what they learned or what they may have contributed. And then the next TMC meeting is in May. This will be up in the Boston area, FM Approvals, which is south of Boston. The next SMB meeting is in June. You notice we try to meet 1 month ahead of the SMB meeting because, as I showed you in the agenda, we prepare for what would be U.S. positions. And there's the Germany annual meeting of the IEC. You can see it's in Frankfurt in October. And that will be the last meeting of the year of the SMB. And then there's activity on 2017. The interesting thing I'll point out, go to 2022, for those of you that will have breath at that time, that will be the next IEC general meeting that the U.S. hosts. The last one was in 2010 where we hosted it in Seattle. It was a good success. And we already are planning, and I'm on the planning committee for what's happening in 2022. And yeah, it's hard to think about that, but if you really think about it, it's only 6 years away. So with that, I've gone through the agenda, and I think that's all I wanted to cover. So let me summarize. What I did is I introduced you to find out the information on the U.S. National Committee and the Technical Management Committee by going through where it is on the ANSI website, www.ansi.org, and you click on Standards in the left-hand column, and then you click on the U.S. National Committee. Then I kind of went swiftly over to the Technical Management Committee meeting of I guess almost 2 months ago. I'm sorry, time flies. It actually was last month. So the purpose of that was to, number one, show you what's present, what's discussed, gone over some of the details of some decisions, and give you a sense of all of that the USNC is involved with. And if you have any questions that, if there was a topic that was, that I showed you that is of immediate interest, Tony Zartucci, the General Secretariat, is more than happy to answer questions where he can. And if there's something that should be brought up at the next TMC meeting, he always prepares the agenda. And my point being is this is not necessarily a closed area, but we do have some representation on the U.S. National Committee. I am a representative for the U.S. EMC Coordinating EMC Standards Committee, but the bottom line is that I take into account questions that are asked other than from my own company. So with that, I would like to call a conclusion to our webinar, our first webinar of 2016, and I invite you to be attending the next 5 webinars as the year progresses. And if you realize that these are all recorded and can be played back to others, and that information is being assembled into an area that the Secretary of the Conformity Assessment Section will have available so you can find it easy. So with that, I conclude this webinar, and thank you for listening.